What's up, dudes? HW here. Thank you so much for watching Tone Jiggy TV. Today, I want to put to the test all of the modelers and see if they can do that magical thing that tubes can do, that really hard to reproduce, maybe impossible to reproduce, magical thing that tube amps do so well. It's touch sensitivity, that ability to just clean up, to play, set the amp dirty, and to clean it up with just your volume knob or your pick attack. Maybe you got one pickup that's set a little lighter, set with the volume down, or maybe you switch from a humbucker to a single and really get all your shades of clean through dirty and everything in between right there. So this is a Trainwreck Express 60. Now you've probably heard of these amplifiers. They're wonderful, they're quite rare. This is a new to me amplifier. It's a JM build Trainwreck. And if you know anything about Trainwrecks, you know they are regarded as being the most touch sensitive of any tube amp. These things get dirty quickly. You set them kind of fully gained up, and then you just are supposed to be able to get all the cleans with just your guitar. Well, I wanted to see if this is the one thing that modelers, because they struggle with this, I wanted to know if this is the one thing that only tube amps can do. Okay, now the first thing I noticed there is that the helix is quite a bit dirtier than all the other examples. And that's because I took all of the capture platforms. I took the Kemper, the Quad Cortex, and Tonex, and I captured the amp at those settings, recorded all those together. Later I came back and I tone matched the helix. The helix really has a separate process that I do to make patches, where it's a tone match. It's really just an EQ match, and I create a custom IR to get the model in the helix to sound like a real world amp that I own. It's a different approach. It's a different thing. I created a full like helix layout thing, and I just used too much gain because I did it later at a different time. It's really not a knock on the helix. I actually think the helix sounds like the amplifier, just with more gain. But what you notice there is what we're really looking for, this touch sensitive thing. You can go back and listen to those clips. There's tons of nuance and stuff in there. But the amp really amps have this way of, tubes just do this thing. They don't just decay in volume, but they clean up. And the relationship between cleaning up and decaying in volume is really something the ear becomes accustomed to. And so we're trying to see, does the Kemper do that? Does the Quad Cortex do that? Does the Tonex do that? The Helix sort of does it in a different way. The relationship seems different. The note seems to say, stay dirtier longer while the note decays in volume, meaning the volume drops, but it doesn't quite clean up right away. Where I notice with the tube amp and these other ones, they really sort of clean and then decay and then clean more. And that enables you to really get those lovely, clean bits just by playing lightly. I thought the Kemper and the QC and the Tonex really did an impressive job here. But is there still something with the tube amp? Now in this example, I was using 2 humbucker pickups, and you saw me flip up to the neck humbucker, and I have that neck humbucker set to about 5, so it's about half on the volume. Well, I tend to play Strats and P90s a lot, and so I wanted to see if you could do this same trick with a humbucker in the bridge and then flipping it to sort of the most polite position on a Strat, the number 4 position with that neck and middle out of phase. Let's see how the modelers all keep up there. Okay, obviously Helix still doing its own thing. Sounds great. Little too much gain. Sorry about that. All the others, though. I had it scripted. I had it scripted in here in my notes that this is where I would point out a lot of the subtleties that the tube amp does and talk about how it breaks up so much better than these other units. And that's not really what happened. Actually, listening back to these clips, you hear a tendency of the Kemper to sort of add a little more mid-range. Or rather, it has this sort of compressed mid-range quality, which I quite like. I actually, in this sound, with the Strat, I really liked it. I maybe even liked it more than the tube amp, but it cleaned up beautifully. It still had that its own little EQ signature that it sort of added there, a little just that mid-range emphasis, but maybe that's your thing. It's hard for me to say it didn't sound as good. It definitely did sound as good. And I thought it was extremely touch sensitive. The Quad Cortex seemed in both of these examples to clean up a bit. It actually seems to reduce the gain. And that is a slight a tendency that I notice about Quad Cortex captures. If they do anything, they tend to give a little more cleanliness to the sound. And I usually compensate a little bit just by upping that gain a little bit, and you sort of get the saturation back. Maybe it's picking up a lot of the dynamic range, but I find that maybe it's a little uncompressed, whereas the amp might be a little more compressed. It's very subtle, and it's really something I only notice when I listen to clips playing back. And the Tonex, a little bit the same thing. Now, Tonex gives you a trim volume and tells you to adjust it. It could be a little more clean or less clean, and then that sort of gets baked in when you capture or sort of solidify the capture through the Tonex software. I'll tell you, playing it gave me a little bit different sensation than listening to it. When I played it, I do feel a slight difference in the responsiveness of being a little bit cleaner in the tube amp that you don't quite feel in anything else. Now, the Kemper's mid-range sort of compression there over those mid-frequencies, it's something you hear in an A/B test, but it's not something you really pick up on in isolation. In fact, I never feel like, oh, this Kemper sounds just like honky mid. It doesn't sound like that. It's a very subtle thing that you only really get in an A/B test. The Quad Cortex and Tonex also, that little bit of cleanup, I especially notice on the Quad Cortex. Again, it's an A/B thing. If you just had a little more gain on the amp and you captured it, it'd be the same. If you up the gain a little bit, it's the same. Playing it, I felt like I noticed a little bit of a difference in the feel. The tube amp does have a certain quality that is not 100% replicated on any of the devices, but each of the devices have a little bit of their own thing. Again, we're so in the weeds here. We're so in the details, in the minutia. But that's what being a tone junkie is about. That's what being on YouTube is about. And I would say, listening back, it really changed my opinion even more so, because it's hard for me to listen to these clips and really tell you that there's any significant difference that I'm hearing. Of course, when there's back-to-back clips, you can pick up on the differences. When we focus on the differences of anything, we're magnifying them. There's this interesting study done a long time ago, and it was about how our eyes and brains have evolved to see danger. And what they basically found was, when they did a whole kind of plot of dots on a graph, and they asked people, okay, focus on the red dots. They showed them the red dots, and there was a bunch of red dots, and they had them do this 4 and 5 times, and every time they did it, they actually removed red dots, but they gave them more time to study the photo. At first, it was just a few seconds, then it was more, and eventually it was minutes long that they were able to study this photo. And do you know what everyone reported? They reported that the amount of red dots was increasing, even though if you quantified the amount of red dots on the picture, they were decreasing. They were decreasing rapidly. But people's brains, when they had more time to focus on something they were looking for, they found it. That's useful for us as human beings, right? When we maybe lived in the savannah and we needed to see the eyes of a jaguar, peeking out from the bushes. When you're focused on something, you will see it, you will find it. I think that's especially true in tests like this, when we line up these tests to focus on the differences, to focus on the minute, small details. The 1% becomes 10, 20, 30%, but it's inaudible, inconceivable, imperceivable, in any other scenario but an isolated test like this. So it really begs the question, for me, what's the point of even doing these tests? I don't know. But I set out in this video to kind of show the one thing tubes really did better than models. And while you can hear some things in these examples, go back and listen. There's no way if you kept the reverb and delay the exact same across the models, if you put this in any kind of a mix, if you put even one other guitar with it, anything else with it, that you'd be able to pick up on this. And as a player even, the dynamic detail of being able to go up and down with dynamics and rolling it back, it's just, we're there,